All right, y'all, welcome back to the show. It's Antiwar Radio. I'm Scott Horton. And our next guest is Robert Naiman. He is Policy Director at Just Foreign Policy. Of course, that is justforeignpolicy.org online. Mr. Naiman edits the Just Foreign Policy Daily News Summary and writes on U.S. foreign policy at the Huffington Post. He's the president of the board of Truthout. Welcome to the show. How's it going?
It's good to be with you.
Well, I'm happy you're here. So, today's the big day, according to Fox News, top of the hour, the end of the war, and Joe Biden snuck into Iraq last night to declare victory, and Obama's going to give a big speech tonight, and so everybody can get down on their knees and worship Lord Obama for coming through on his wonderful promise, right?
Well, I hope not. First of all, the war is not over. Even if you spend more than 7 seconds reading the print media, even the Washington Post editorial board that totally supports the war, always supported the war, said in editorial, the war is not over. We still have 50,000 troops there. They've been rebranded from combat brigades to advise and assist brigades, but they're still carrying guns, still carrying out military operations. They're still killing, and they're still being killed. So the war is not over. I give Obama some credit for following through with his promise to reduce to 50,000 troops. I give Obama some credit for continuing to insist that all U.S. troops will be out by the end of 2011, as specified in the signed agreement between the United States government and the Iraqi government. I give him credit for that because there's a lot of counter pressure. There are a lot of people in Washington who, supported the war originally, who have not given up on the idea of the United States having a permanent military garrison in Iraq to project power in the region. That struggle is not over, and it won't be over until all the troops are out consistent with the agreement. So I think it's important to keep an eye on that because there are forces that are trying to undermine that. At the same time, one cannot celebrate, certainly, any kind of victory, any kind of success, any kind of win. This war has been a total catastrophe for the United States. It's been a total catastrophe for the people of Iraq. Hundreds of thousands of Iraqis have been killed. There's more than 1 million refugees. There's been a tremendous human suffering has been unleashed on Americans and Iraqis as a result of the illegal decision by the Bush administration to invade Iraq, and as a result of the decision by the U.S. Congress at that time to support that, and by the U.S. media at that time to support that. Not only that, but one of the things that President Obama is going to do in his speech, according to press reports, is pivot from Iraq to Afghanistan. So at the same time, we'll be celebrating or marking or whatever we'll be doing the drawdown to 50,000 troops in Iraq, we'll be marking the escalation in Afghanistan, which is certainly contrary to, the broad promise of peace that President Obama was elected on, if not actually contrary to the fine print of what he was saying at the time, which many people weren't paying attention to, namely that he did, without specifying detail, that he did intend to escalate in Afghanistan. There's now 3 times as many U.S. troops in Afghanistan as there were when President Obama took office. More U.S. soldiers have died in Afghanistan since President Obama was inaugurated than died in Afghanistan under President Bush. So there's certainly nothing to celebrate there, and I think people ought to ask, as President Obama correctly withdraws U.S. troops from Iraq, why the same logic doesn't apply to the U.S. occupation of Afghanistan. If we can withdraw from Iraq, why can we not also withdraw U.S. troops from Afghanistan?
Yeah, especially when under the narrative, it's the same counterinsurgency doctrine in a place where it's much less likely to work, the same counterinsurgency doctrine that Obama opposed as a senator when it was being implemented in Iraq.
It's the same doctrine that he opposed. He made the argument at the time that perfect security in Iraq cannot be the bar for U.S. withdrawal, because if you make that the bar, then we'll never leave. And, of course, some people don't want to ever leave, and that's why they try to make perfect security the bar. The same considerations hold for Afghanistan. And in fact, as the United States has added more troops, violence in Afghanistan has spread. So we're not making Afghanistan more safe for the Afghan people by our military presence. We're not making Americans safer by our military presence. There was an item in the last week, the head of U.S. Special Forces said that the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have actually degraded the U.S. Ability to hunt, terrorists' ability to acquire weapons of mass destruction. Now, regardless of how big a threat you think that is, according to him, it's a big threat. The threat's been never greater. And yet this threat that's been never greater is something that the U.S. ability to confront has been degraded by the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, because these special forces guys who are the specialists on hunting terrorist possession of ability to possess weapons of mass destruction, they're not doing that. They're fighting counterinsurgency in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they're not training to hunt terrorists. They're busy fighting a counterinsurgency against, in the case of Afghanistan, against the Taliban insurgency, which is largely devoted to driving out the foreign forces. So it doesn't make any sense. The policy that we have now in Afghanistan makes no more sense than the policy in Iraq that Senator Obama and Candidate Obama opposed.
Well, I always like to do the counterfactual because Harry Brown ran for president in the year 2000, and I think if he had won, probably September 11th wouldn't have even happened, because he would have cut Israel and everybody else off the dole immediately, and he would have got the troops out of Saudi Arabia immediately. The attack might have never even taken place. But if it had taken place, of course, and he told me this himself when I asked him, his whole program would have been to do the most minimal response possible. And, of course, anyone could see, even, whatever, if it was Ralph Nader or any decent person who was the president, regardless of their particular ideology, the way to actually fight a war on Al-Qaeda would be to, expand Interpol a little bit and try to work with the national police in Kyrgyzstan or whatever. This is how you fight a war against a couple of dozen pirates on a rampage. You don't declare war on 60 nations in the world. That's a prescription, I think, pretty obviously a deliberate one for creating more crises so they can have more wars, because that's what the Pentagon does for a living.
Well, the main thing that the United States should have done after September 11th is what it did do, which was reform its domestic security operation, which 99.999% of Americans agree with. Those guys should never have gotten on those planes, and they shouldn't have gotten on those planes with weapons. Nobody should be allowed to get on planes with weapons, and those particular guys shouldn't have been allowed to get on any plane. And the U.S. government has conceded both those facts. Those guys shouldn't have been allowed to get on those planes. And it revamped its domestic security procedures, as we all know from, any flight that you've taken since September 11th, 2001, particularly in the immediate period afterwards. So
Bush also immediately, at least immediately upon the invasion of Iraq, got the bases out of Saudi Arabia. He kept them, of course, in Bahrain on the Arabian Peninsula. But Paul Wolfowitz even said, great, now that we've invaded Iraq, we can get our bases out of Saudi Arabia, which is the motivation for these guys to join the bin Ladenite group and their war.
Well, that's exactly right. And I think that that's one of the real connections between September 11th and the U.S. invasion of Iraq, is that people in the elite in the United States, I'm a senior State Department guy, tell me this directly, they drew the conclusion from September 11th that the U.S. relations with Saudi Arabia were unsustainable, and we need a new base of operations in the Middle East. We need to get our troops out of
right, that'll calm everyone down. We'll just invade Iraq and kill hundreds of thousands of people there. All right, hold it there, everybody. It's Robert Naiman from the Huffington Post and a lot of other places, Just Foreign Policy. And we'll be right back.